It's once again time for one of our newest segments on the show, Blade to Greatness, where we hear from a retail industry leader who shares their insights and wisdom on how to excel in this dynamic and competitive field. In this segment, we learn about the essential skills and qualities that every retail executive needs to lead their teams and their business to success. Whether we're talking about the corporate office or stores, we'll uncover valuable tips and advice that you can apply to your own retail career growth.
This episode, we're speaking with Ron Thurston, co-founder of Ossy, best-selling author of Retail Pride, podcast host, speaker, advisor, and board member. Ron leverages his extensive experience leading retail operations for America's most prominent brands to bring attention to the issues facing frontline workers and retail leaders today. After releasing his first book, Retail Pride, and launching the Retail in America tour and podcast, Ron has co-founded Ossy to disrupt how the retail industry hires, engages, connects retail workers with retail brands and technology providers.
And today he's here to talk to us about a truly important question that every retail leader needs to answer. What can retailers do today to bridge communication from the floor to corporate?
Welcome, Ron.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Casey and Ricardo. It's a pleasure to be back. As always, I love being on your show. And I love this topic. When you sent the description, you're right. This is a topic that comes up really often from peers of mine, those that have led stores and now lead brands, people who work in the field and sometimes have frustration with corporate, and corporate that has frustration with the field. I sit in a position today where I actually hear it from both sides. So I do, and so, where I would start with this question is the same place I start every conversation, which are, I've spoken about this often on your show, is what I call the 3 pillars of success in retail. And, they've become more around pillars of success in life, but empathy, curiosity, and focus. And so if I saw that question and I'd say, what could we do to bridge the gap today between corporate and stores? I'll start with on the corporate side. The first thing I would do would be think about empathy. What do I imagine people in stores are feeling today? Are they under pressure for sales goals? Do they have the right inventory? Are they fearful of increase in kind of disruptive shopping activity, we'll call it, or being hurt at work? There's a lot of really important conversations that would lean into empathy. So the first thing I do is, well, how do I imagine stores are feeling today? And the follow-up to that is, well, I'm going to ask, because the best thing you can do to bridge the gap is to build trust. And trust only is developed by being curious and then by acting on that information. So I think, there's a lot of conversation of corporate spending more time in stores. I don't try to judge that or how much time you should spend, because everyone has a lot on their plate. There's a lot of things that impact someone's ability to travel or to have the budget to do so. So what I say is, whether it's a phone call, a Zoom call, a store visit, whatever your forum for communication is, the best thing you can do is ask questions and be curious and say, you know what, Ricardo, how are you feeling today? What do you and your team, what are you experiencing? What are the conversations you're having when there's no customers in the store? What do you really need to drive your business? What tools and resources do you have today or maybe need more of? So this kind of stream of curiosity, I think, builds a great rapport. And the focus, when I think about the third part of this conversation, is what do you do with that information you just received? Because trust then is built to say, you know what, Ricardo, I'm so glad you shared all this with me today. What I'm going to do is go back to my team at the office, and we're going to go through all of this data, and we're going to come up with some strategies, and we're going to come back to you in the next 2 weeks and talk to you about what we can accomplish, what maybe this year, next year, and maybe the things that we can't. But keep your promise. And so what the store team does is then say, wow, I'm so glad Ron came today and listened and like heard what we had to say, didn't judge it. That's where you use empathy, because it's really quick to say, well, I don't understand why you don't get that or why you can't do this. You just need to do it. And empathy helps you ask more questions and put yourself in that place of, well, how are they experiencing the world and their business and their customer and their team? What do they need to do better? How curious can I be? And what do I do with that information? For me, that's how you build rapport. And I would say the same thing about stores. I think often what I discovered when I became a vice president of stores is there's also misinformation at the store level about what people at corporate do. And so there's this idea of, well, whether it's product, whether it's resources, whether it's payroll, whether it's operational efficiencies, maintenance, I mean, the list goes on. Sometimes there's this judgment that happens in stores about corporate. And so you make assumptions that they can do better or should be doing more or should be spending more money or should be buying product differently. And my, kind of advice or thought process is here, we'll use the same pillars and say, well, how do people in corporate, what's their experience today? And maybe there's been headcount reduction in the office. Maybe there have been budget cuts. Maybe there have been other things that are restricting their ability to give me the things that I may need to drive my business. So how do I imagine the corporate teams are feeling? And then be curious, like, well, how can I ask great questions to get what I need? And the focus is, how can I then deliver on the result that I'm expected to deliver with full insight into information? And where that really showed up for me is, as a vice president of stores and traveled as much as I possibly could, listened. I really did try to act, but sometimes it's actually going back and saying, I hear you, but we can't do that. And here's why. Or, and because I ran a multi-brand fashion business, every store has a list of things brands that they want to sell, sizes that they need, colors that they want. The product was the number one conversation always, but it's so complicated when you start talking about brands that you could sell in certain locations, inventory levels, sell-through numbers, margin conversations, kind of restrictions on merchandising. So it becomes an education process back to the field and say, look, I hear you, and I'm really curious about why that needs to happen. And let me just talk to you a little bit about what buying, planning, and merchandising mean and how that impacts your business. So I think it's our responsibility as leaders to be bridging the gap through education and through conversation. And it's not a one size fits all. It's very much let's try to solve to the best of our abilities by using empathy, curiosity, and focus on both sides.
Yeah, I love the way you describe that. And one of the things immediately comes to my mind as I'm listening to you, Ron, describe the process behind this is that really what you're doing, and if I think of it as what's the outcome of this, you're actually presenting to your store teams, for example, that corporate doesn't just view you as an endpoint, but that you're actually part of the business. So there's that combination of what you said at the beginning to you're asking what their experience is, you're acknowledging what they've told you, not dismissing it because you don't think it should be that way, right? Which I think is a common perception that I think stores have about corporate, that they'll just dismiss what we say because they don't think it should be that way. You're acknowledging it, but then you're also recognizing that whether you can or can't do something about it, you're still closing the loop and making sure that if there's a reason why you can't, you're explaining what that reason is. You're not just, again, dismissing it out of hand and saying it's not important, which just makes this team feel like they're not being heard, even if you did acknowledge it. You're also recognizing that we're trying to see what we can do about it, but maybe we can do something, maybe we can't. And if we can, wonderful, here's how we together resolve that challenge or whatever that issue might be. And I think that is probably the way I look at it as, if you're a member of that store team, you come away feeling that I'm not just this unit of labor that the brand is benefiting from. We're actually part of a whole. We're part of the whole business and the brand together.
And that takes great intention on both sides. Mm-hmm. It takes intention from and eliminating some of the assumptions about what people do and why they do it, and not judge that someone else's job is harder or easier than yours, because everyone's role is important, whether it's in part-time, new hire in the store or someone that holds an executive position. Everyone's role is important. They just have a different needs at different times for the business. And so I will look at that and say, actually, a new hire whose first day is on the floor today is interacting with the customer that the company just spent thousands of dollars marketing to get them to walk into the store. And that customer's experience now is determined by this person whose first day on the job is today. And so whether you are the CMO of the company who just signed off on a multi-million-dollar budget to drive traffic, or I'm the part-time person on my first day, the ultimate goal is that customer has an incredible experience. It just so happens that customer that you just spent money on to get into the store is engaged with a new hire. And so we can't say one is more important, because the customer could have this incredible experience. And like, oh my God, I met Casey. She showed me all these things that she loves. And she told me it was her first day. And she asked for my patience while we went through the journey, but she was incredible. And I love this brand and I can't wait to come back and see Casey again. I mean, that's a really good outcome. Or, the opposite could happen. I don't need to describe that, but I think that there's this sense of, if you treat everyone with empathy and kindness, you recognize that everyone's role is important. They just have different purposes.
Yeah, I think acknowledging that every single person who works for you at a brand is your consumer, an advocate in the community. Nobody, no matter what company people apply to work at, people typically apply to companies that they like, love, or are inspired by. And that bad experience of working there, the bad experience of communication, the bad experience of not feeling supportive, that loses you a customer, their family, their friends. It permeates that this bad experience happened with this brand. And I know because I literally work for them. They're terrible. And you can't really recover from that. And I almost feel like part of the hiring process and managing those teams, it is PR in a lot of ways. This is you have to take it super serious, because it's worse than, you have all this social media and things like that. And just this is a customer at the end of the day.
It's true. I would even take that further back, Casey. It actually starts when someone's interested in working there.
Yeah.
Which is part of, we're not here to speak about Ossy, but the idea here is, their likelihood of staying with a brand actually starts before they're even hired. When during the journey of interviews or lack of interviews, lack of follow-up or incredible follow-up, all of that creates impressions that, okay, great, I get the job, but you just tortured me for a month to get here.
Right.
Or, oh my gosh, I met these great people. I can't wait for day one. And I'll go back to my example. Okay. So you created an experience of an interview and an onboarding that was so good that customer that I just described that walked in, that the company spent money on, engages with me, and I have an incredible experience. And then the opposite can be very true. So I think that I agree with you, Casey. It's every touch point for every brand is about an experience. And whatever that means for the future of a brand, they're really important moments that we can't put into silos. They're all connected. They're all important. And every person in this kind of ecosystem of retail play really important roles.
Yeah. I think that's a great point about how that experience starts from the moment they're being recruited in that hiring process. I hadn't thought of it until just hearing you say it, that if that hiring experience is already tortuous, then you've just set the stage.
I know it's a strong word, but I actually, I hear enough candidates to know that that's actually a valid word.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I think so. I'm just thinking back to even I remember in some retail jobs, I had the same thing that, it was not a pleasant experience to do that. But you're right. It actually sets the stage for what your day one will be like before you even get to day one. And I think in that sense, right, it's wise for brands to think of, from the marketing point of view, brands like to look at influencers, right, to promote products. But at the end of the day, they should really be thinking that, well, you have an entire team of influencers at your store that work day in, day out. Because like you said earlier, however expensive a campaign you may have run to drive customers to go into the store, to walk through the door, well, the very next point of influence they're going to have is likely to be that store team member who they talk to first.
Yep.
Yeah, it's word of mouth is very powerful tool for marketing. And I feel that the best way to get that word of mouth marketing is literally through your employees. Because that is, 90% of like friends and family that they know you're happy at X brand, X company, and that influences them more than a review online.
Right. No, it's true. And social media just escalates that very quickly. And there's a lot of TikTok and that don't paint retail in a positive light. Mm-hmm. And some of that is deserved. And so I think we do have to do better. It's valuable information, and it's valuable to think about, again, with empathy, how is the candidate experiencing, what is someone's first day on the job? And when I worked at Apple, and I've mentioned this before, they still today use a very phrase that I think leans into empathy. That is, I don't know, let's find out. And it's common language for them. And it's okay to say, you know what, I have no idea what you're talking about, but I'm going to find the best person to solve this problem for you or to answer your question. And then instead of putting the pressure on you to be an expert at everything, which we do, it's okay to say, I don't know, but I'm going to find someone that does. And we're going to make sure that you leave this building with the best possible experience. And that may not be from me. And that takes pressure off of store teams. Mm-hmm. And so the same, going back to your original question, how do we bridge the gap? You bridge the gap by not expecting everyone to be an expert at everything. You bridge the gap by saying, we have incredible salespeople, but incredible salespeople are not always good at doing markdowns. Incredible salespeople, Casey knows this from her other work, great salespeople are really good with people, but they may not be the best at tasks. And you have great people who are really good at tasks, who are terrified to speak to a customer. You can have both. And that's it's welcome. And that's how you have great hiring. And that kind of idea of everyone in retail should be good at everything is a false narrative, I believe.
Yes, there are certain people who I'd never invite back to doing inventory.
It would probably be me, which is, why I was like, oh, where's the food? Like, who's doing the catering tonight? And like, I would do everything I could to get doing inventory.
Have a party, but I'm just like, seriously, you counted it 8 times and it's still not the same number. Go have a beer and or go home.
It's the same. But, that's why you surround yourself with great people. I had great ops people, and they're like, Ron, you don't have to come tonight. It's fine. I'm like, cool.
Well, I think on that super interesting note, we've come to the end of this segment. Ron, thanks so much for joining us and sharing your insights on how to improve those lines of communication.
Thank you. Thanks, Ricardo. Thank you, Casey.
Always such a pleasure.
Always.